Hey, what is going on, guys? In this video today, we're going to be going over the strategic gameplay differences between playing on 60 FPS and playing on 120. So at this point, the console Fortnite community is basically split between playing on these two FPS values. If you have a current gen console or a next gen console but not a 120Hz monitor, you're going to have to play on 60 FPS. But if you're lucky enough to have a next-gen console with a proper monitor, 120 it is. Now, as of this current moment, just based on the comments I've seen, there are definitely way more console players still playing on 60 FPS, but over time, more and more people are obviously going to upgrade, so I think this video will be helpful no matter what your current situation is. We're basically going to be breaking down a bunch of different skills and types of fights in Fortnite, and talking about in which ones there's a major difference between 60 and 120 FPS, which ones there isn't too much of a difference, and also everything else in between. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so the first type of fight that I want to talk about in this video is probably the most important one in Fortnite, and that is close-range shotgun battles. I've noticed that for console players specifically, shotgun aim is without a doubt one of the most common weaknesses that players feel they have. Despite controller being considered the better input for SMG and AR aim, it seems that for some reason, mouse is the better option for shotgun aim. Now, some people would argue that's due to a lack of aim assist in those types of fights, but now that I think about it, I think it's mostly due to the lack of FPS. It's really hard to put into words what an increase of FPS does for shotgun aim, but the best way I could try to describe it is by saying that it makes it so much easier to track and control everything that's happening on your screen, and the most basic simplification that people commonly say is that it makes the gameplay feel so much smoother. When you're on 60 FPS, although you may be used to it to some degree, the reality is that everything you see on your screen, and player movement especially, is going to be very choppy. I actually want to show a GIF I found online that highlights this very well. As you can see at the higher FPS values, that soldier's movement is very smooth and realistic. It looks like how a person would move in real life. But on the 60 FPS side, which is the bottom one, that same soldier almost looks like he's lagging because there's so many skip frames and choppiness in the simple movement. Just take a second to think about how much of a negative impact that choppiness has on a typical Fortnite shotgun fight. Good players are going to be strafing, jumping, and crouching like crazy, so as if that weren't already hard enough to follow with perfectly smooth FPS, when you also throw in the skippiness of 60 FPS on top of that, you start to understand why so many console players say they struggle in shotgun fights. So the good news is, if you're planning to upgrade to 120 FPS in the future, I'm fairly confident that you'll notice an almost immediate bump when it comes to your shotgun aim. Obviously, it won't make you go from terrible to great or anything, but as long as your aiming fundamentals are at least decent, trust me, you'll feel like a totally different player in these close-range shotgun battles that are just so important in Fortnite. So the other main aim category that you would probably wonder about after shotgun aim is AR aim, and even though that same principle applies of enemy movement being smoother and easier to track, I don't think the difference at longer range is as pronounced as it is in these point-blank range shotgun fights. I do think it helps slightly, don't get me wrong, but as I've said a few times before, in long-range AR fights, it's unlikely that your enemy's going to be doing something that makes them super elusive. Maybe if they like shockwave or use a bouncer, then yeah, sure, but obviously that's a very rare scenario. So just in regular old AR bloom battles, or even shooting at an enemy not facing you, 120 FPS will help, but probably not a ton, and definitely not as much as it does in close range fights. The next area that people are always curious about how much FPS affects it is editing. Editing in general is another area where console and controller is at a pretty significant disadvantage to mouse and keyboard PC, but the impact that FPS has on it kinda depends on your playstyle. If you're someone who's more of a slow tactical editor, fairly basic wall and ramp edits mostly, I don't think there's really gonna be much of a difference between playing on 60 and 120. Since when you edit, you're dealing with an inanimate object, it's not like the FPS choppiness is really gonna hurt you all that much. The game feeling smoother in general will probably make you a bit more consistent as a whole, but it's not something that's going to be super noticeable right away. However, if you're more of a mechanics-based player where you do a lot of editing and retakes, or maybe make a lot of double and triple edit offensive plays, then I do think that 120 FPS will actually give a pretty big boost to your playstyle. Just due to the super flicky and quick movement nature that these advanced techniques require, the extra frames of 120 FPS will certainly help a lot. I've never really played like that, so I can't give you too much of a personal point of view here, but I have seen some of the really cracked console creative players say that going from 60 to 120 did make a pretty huge difference for them, so if you're someone like that, then there's some good news for you. Obviously though, like I sort of said earlier, the reason why you're going to lose most edit fights to PC players isn't because of FPS, it's more so because they're using keyboard and mouse, which is just the superior input for editing. The next type of skill that you may be wondering how FPS impacts is building, and I think there's really two different types of building nowadays in Fortnite. Build battles, which have been around forever basically, where two players go for high ground, and now you also have peace control, which has just become all the rage over the last year or so. So starting with peace control, I think this is an aspect of Fortnite where there is a night and day difference between 60 and 120 FPS. Much like with close range aim, close range peace control is all about reacting to your enemy's movement and placing building pieces to block or restrict said movement, and a lot of times peace control literally comes down to fractions of a second. That little amount of time can easily be the difference between an enemy escaping your box attempt or you being successful in trapping them and then shotgunning them. So obviously the extra FPS and smoothness of enemy movement is just going to make peace control a lot easier as a whole. It's honestly really hard to be a successful peace control player on low FPS, so I've always kind of suggested that you guys stay away from everything other than the really simple peace control stuff. But on 120, you can get a lot more advanced with it if you have solid mechanics. And then when it comes to build battles for high ground, this is another category that I don't think there's a huge difference between 60 and 120. I guess like with editing, maybe for some of the super advanced retakes, that extra smoothness and lack of choppiness will help you mess up your builds a little less frequently. But even when I would go from 200 FPS on PC to 60 on console, building was definitely one of the areas that I struggled with the least. If you can do a ramp rush or retake on higher FPS, odds are you'll probably be able to do it on 60 almost as consistently. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you watched the entire thing, be sure to let me know with a comment down in the comment section below. If you play on 60 FPS, what advantage of 120 are you most looking forward to? And if you're already on 120, what's the biggest difference that you noticed compared to when you played on 60? Be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, turn on post notifications, do whatever the heck you want, and I will catch you guys next time.